If your cow runs away, there are people who help you catch it. It was the same way with slaves. Slaves were treated like livestock, property. Someone could call the pound if they saw a cow wandering around. They are supposed to. It was the same way with slaves. If someone saw a slave, they were supposed to report it. In 1850, it actually became the law, and anyone who helped a slave was fined.
The law was part of the Great Compromise of 1850. It was called the Fugitive Slave Law. The Fugitive Slave Law promoted the catching of slaves. In the North, this law was a huge problem because people against slavery were forced to catch slaves instead of helping them escape. The Fugitive Slave Act has 10 different sections. Each section provided a controversy and different opinions from the North and the South.
Section 1 states that the House of Representatives can appoint commissioners. The South liked this idea because the commissioners helped chase slaves. The North disliked this idea because the House of Representatives should not support the slave catchers in their opinion.
Section 2 says that the states are allowed to appoint more commissioners. The northern states did not want more slave catchers, so they did not tend to use the law. The South took advantage of this part of the law.
Section 3 says that the states can appoint a large number of commissioners if the commissioners there are overwhelmed. This further enraged the North, who did not want to have commissioners in the first place, while the South took advantage of this section.
Section 4 states that the marshal who catches the slave is responsible for the slave until he returns home. If the slave escapes, the marshal would be fined. The North disliked this law because they would often want to help a captured slave escape, but would not want to fine their marshal. The South liked it because it increased the chance of the slave making it back.
Section 5 states that a marshal cannot refuse to hunt down a slave, and can gather a posse to help him hunt down the slave. This posse can pass into another state, and the posse and the marshal shall be paid. All citizens are supposed to aid the search, and anyone who helps the slave can be fined $1,000. This meant great resistance in the northern states, who often refused to help. The South encouraged the law.
Section 6 states that the slaveholders must prove to the court that the slave belongs to them. Most often they did this by showing proof of purchase. The North did not resist against this law, but the South did not see why they had to prove it.
Section 7 states that any person who tries to help the slave escape or prevent the finding of a slave or make the trial unfair can be fined $1,000 and be sent to jail for up to 6 months. The North hated this law, and it met a lot of resistance in the non-slave owning states.
Section 8 states that the marshal who has the slave is responsible for them, and if the slave escapes, the marshal will be fined. This met with resistance in the South.
Section 9 states that a marshal can gather a posse to aid him in safely escorting the slave back to their owner. This again met resistance in the North because many Northerners refused to help escort the slaves and return them to their owners. The South liked this law because the slave could get back safely.
Section 10 states that the District of Columbia can aid the catching of a slave who came from another state, although anyone in D.C. cannot own slaves. The southern states liked this law because they wanted more people to help catch the slaves. The North did not because the slave had less of a chance to escape.
This law was created on September 18, 1850, as part of the Compromise of 1850. It involved from the Fugitive Act of 1793. In 1854, Wisconsin declared the act unconstitutional. They were the first and only state to declare it unconstitutional. However, the Supreme Court overruled the state court.
The Fugitive Slave Act was nicknamed the Bloodhound Law because of the bloodhounds used to hunt down a slave. When the Civil War started, some generals, like Benjamin Butler, released fugitive slaves because the North and South were fighting.
Slaves often escape with the illegal help of the Northerners. The slaves that did escape often ran to Canada. People would often refuse to help the marshals and help slaves escape. People would yell and scream at the marshals and the posse, calling them slave catchers. Sometimes a slave would even be rescued from under a marshal's nose.
The Fugitive Slave Act created a lot of tension between the northern and southern states. It provoked abolitionists into defying the law. The Northerners that were against slavery were forced to help return slaves to the South, where they would be beaten for running away. Many people thought this was wrong, and did not want it to obey the law. The South supported the Fugitive Slave Act and wanted the North to obey it. This great argument and tension played a huge role in the starting of the Civil War, in which the Union won. Because of the Civil War, slavery was ended and America was changed forever.